Okay, so let's move on. So we've got this concept of bradycardia. Let's break the word down first of all. We know that cardia refers to heart because we've kind of addressed that already, so that bit's kind of nice. We can sort of section that bit up. What's this brady business all about? Well, brady as a prefix or a prefix refers to, I looked at this recently actually, it directly translates to tardy. If you've ever used that word in English, I don't know, but it relates to tardy. But the best way we can kind of define it is it means abnormally slow. Abnormally slow. Okay, so brady means abnormally slow. So we're saying here, literally, we've got an abnormal, I can't say it for some reason, oh my goodness, an abnormally slow heart. Hey, that's hard to say. So let's see how we would define it in kind of our PE studies here, okay? So we're saying bradycardia is a resting heart rate below 60 beats per minute. Now, one of the first things I'd encourage you to do is to find out whether you yourself experience this condition. So can you get into a situation and into a state of kind of relaxation, probably lying down, where you get your heart rate to below 60 beats per minute? Can you actually try to cause that to happen? Now, some people will already be able to do that immediately because they're very kind of aerobically fit and healthy. The rest of us would probably have to concentrate quite hard to try and bring that heart rate down to that resting level and control that in that sense. So one of the things we might want to sort of start to think about is, well, what causes bradycardia? Because it's a very common condition. Let me just put over here. It's very common in endurance athletes. Okay, so endurance athletes will very commonly experience this bradycardia. Now, there have been crazy stories about people, really, really finely tuned athletes having resting heart rate down in the sort of mid and high 20 beats per minute. That seems very, very extreme, and I think we should definitely be going back into some historical blood passports to see what substances those cyclists often might have been involved with. But nevertheless, it kind of emphasizes this point. So we want to know what this is caused by. So what is bradycardia actually caused by? And I want to raise a couple of things. The first thing is, and I think it's a really obvious point, is that we have an increase in stroke volume. So if we've got an increase in stroke volume, we might want to address why that is happening. Okay, and as we've seen already, an increase in stroke volume will typically be caused by an experience of myocardial hypertrophy. And that myocardial hypertrophy, of course, is effectively the new feature of the adapted heart, which is going to cause an increase in stroke volume, so the amount of blood leaving that left ventricle per contraction. Now, the other things that we can say is we also might experience bradycardia, partly at least because we have a better or an increase in VR, or venous return. More blood leading back to the heart, Starling's law, means more stroke volume. So it's kind of the same point, but we can include it here. And finally, I'm going to add the point that we can have a situation of increased capillarization. So, for example, we might have greater capillarization at the alveoli. So as a result of that, we effectively take on board or diffuse into our blood a greater proportion of oxygen available. And therefore, the blood itself is enriched with oxygen to a greater degree. And therefore, the same amount of blood is carrying more oxygen. And just a couple of other very final points. We might have an increase in blood volume. So more blood basically within our vascular system, and we might even have a situation where we've got something like, let me choose a nice colour that I haven't used yet. I can't find one. I think I have used this one actually. We might also have a greater proportion of red blood cells, RBCs, and of course we can refer to this as a higher hematocrit. Nice term to learn if you can remember it. So all of these situations, all of these adaptations are going to mean that we're better able to have a lower resting heart rate. Now, I want to remind you of something which I'm hoping you have nailed down, and that is to say that cardiac output equals stroke volume multiplied by heart rate. Okay, so however much blood is leaving the heart per minute, our Q, our cardiac output, is a product of stroke volume multiplied by product of stroke volume and heart rate. Now, of course, if stroke volume goes up, as we've just said that it would, that's meant to be an up arrow, then of course at rest we only need the same amount of blood, so heart rate can effectively fall proportionately to the increasing stroke volume to maintain the same cardiac output. Now, of course, we're not saying at maximal exercise we would have a lower heart rate. In fact, we would go to our maximum heart rate, but of course we'd then have a higher cardiac output because stroke volume is greater. So I want to quickly address with you guys the effects of bradycardia. What are the effects of it? Okay, so if we're bradycardic, what are the effects? In the vast majority of cases, they are very positive effects for endurance athletes. So the first one is an obvious one. We have a decreased resting heart rate. We already know that. It's exactly what we've been talking about so far. Boom, 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 we're all happy. So decreased resting heart rate, positive. Now what that means in a practical performance sense is that we have a greater or increased heart rate range. Now you guys studying this, I'm going to think of you as, I don't know, 18-year-olds, say. On that basis, you've got a maximum heart rate of about 202 beats per minute. And if your resting heart rate goes down from, I don't know, 70 beats per minute to 50 beats per minute, then of course the difference between 50 and 202 and 70 and 202 is 20 more. In other words, you've got a greater range of heart rate to move into when you start exercising. So that's positive. It allows you to effectively to perform at higher intensities aerobically, more of which in a second. It also means that we have an increased max cardiac output. So the maximum cardiac output we can get to is greater because we've got a greater stroke volume, and our heart rate, albeit lower at rest, can now go to its maximum and still go to, say, your 202 beats per minute, pumping a greater quantity of blood. So we're also going to say that the impact of that is an increased oxygen delivery, and you can add to that CO2 and lactic acid removal. You can add better thermoregulation, all those points. Because there's more blood, there's more cardiac output getting to the working muscle at maximal exercise, it means that we can work more effectively. Another point I'd like to make is that all of that combined means that we are better able to delay obla. So what that means is we can work at higher intensities aerobically and delay the point of exercise in which we start to accumulate lactic acid rapidly to a higher intensity of exercise. And my final comment about this is, as a result of this, we have, of course, our aerobic capacity, refer to it as your VO2 max if you like, our aerobic capacity goes up. So we can clearly see from these bradycardic conditions that this is symbolic of a very, very positive change and a positive influencer on overall fitness capacity. That's all from me.